The cold October air clung to my skin, sharp with the promise of frost, and the only sound was the whisper of dry corn leaves in the dark. I never expected to find my father crying in the middle of his cornfield at 5 in the morning, but there he was, 72 years old, a man whose hands were as tough as old leather and whose emotions were usually buried just as deep, shoulders shaking, standing between the rows like a scarecrow that had finally learned how to feel. My name's David, and I'd driven down from Columbus to help with the harvest that October. The moment I left the highway, the city noise faded away. No more sirens, no more traffic, just the deep quiet of farmland at night. It was supposed to be a regular visit, help Dad bring in the corn, fix whatever was broken around the farm, head back to my accounting job by Monday. I hadn't expected to find him out there in the dark, and I certainly hadn't expected what would happen over the next few days. How a farm that we all thought was dying would suddenly come alive again, not with crops, but with something else entirely. The farm sat just outside Riverside, Ohio, 300 acres that had been in our family for 4 generations, rolling hills that turned gold in autumn, a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, the kind of place that looked like a postcard, at least from the outside. But I knew better. The farm had been struggling for years. Bad weather, worse prices, equipment breaking down faster than Dad could fix it. He'd been doing it mostly alone since Mom died 3 years back. My sister Sarah lived in Seattle. I was 2 hours away in Columbus. We helped when we could, but it was never enough. I'd arrived late Thursday night, let myself in with the key that still lived under the same painted rock it had hidden under since I was 6. The house was quiet. Dad had left a note on the kitchen table. Glad you're here. Coffee's ready to go. See you at dawn. Dawn. Everything on a farm starts at dawn. But I woke up early, couldn't sleep. City habits maybe, or just the strange silence of the country after months of traffic and sirens. I made coffee in the dark, stepped out onto the porch. That's when I saw the light bobbing through the cornfield. Dad's old flashlight, the one with the duct tape holding the batteries in. I pulled on my boots and headed out. The morning was crisp, that October cold that makes your breath visible, makes you grateful for hot coffee. The corn was ready for harvest, dry and golden, rustling in the breeze like whispers. "Dad?" I called out. The light stopped moving, then slowly turned my way. I found him in the middle of the field, still in his pajamas and work boots, his John Deere cap pushed back on his head, tears streaming down his weathered face. In his hand was a piece of paper. Even in the dim light, I could see it was a foreclosure notice. "Dad?" He looked at me, then at the paper, then back at me. 90 days, he said, his voice rough. That's all they're giving me. 90 days to come up with $40,000, or they take it all. I'd known things were bad, but not this bad. Not lose everything bad. "Why didn't you tell me?" He shrugged. That same shrug I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that meant feelings were too big for words. "What were you going to do? You got your own life, your own bills." "We could have figured something out. Sarah and I." "Sarah's got 2 kids in college. You just bought that condo." He shook his head. "This ain't your problem to fix." But standing there in that cornfield, watching my father cry for the first time in my life, it became my problem, our problem, everyone's problem. We walked back to the house in silence, the sun starting to paint the horizon orange. Dad made breakfast like nothing had happened, eggs and bacon, toast with butter, the same breakfast he'd made every morning for 50 years, but his hands shook when he poured the coffee. "I've been thinking," he said finally. "Maybe it's time. Your grandpa held on to this place through the Depression. My dad survived the farm crisis in the 80s, but maybe I'm the one who loses it. Maybe that's just how it goes." "Don't talk like that. It's just land, David, just dirt and crops." But we both knew it was more than that. It was the tree where Sarah broke her arm, the barn where I'd learned to drive the tractor, the field where Mom had planted sunflowers every spring. It was 4 generations of memories soaked into every acre. I spent the morning going through his books, and they were worse than I'd imagined. Medical bills from Mom's cancer treatments, equipment loans, seed costs that kept rising while crop prices fell. He'd refinanced twice, sold off equipment, even sold Mom's car, but it wasn't enough. It's never enough when you're drowning. What about selling part of it? I asked. Keep the house and maybe 50 acres? Dad shook his head. Tried that. Nobody's buying land around here. Not for what I need. By noon, word had somehow gotten out. Small towns are like that. News travels faster than broadband internet. The first to show up was Betty Morrison from the next farm over. She brought a casserole. Heard you might be having a tough time, she said. Like foreclosure was a cold you could cure with tuna noodles, but she also brought something else, an envelope with $500. It's not much, she said, but it's what I got. Dad tried to refuse. Of course he did. Pride runs deeper than wells in farming country, but Betty wouldn't budge. You helped us plant after Harold's surgery. You fixed our truck when we couldn't afford the shop. This is what neighbors do. She left the money on the kitchen table, right next to the foreclosure notice. $500 towards $40,000. It was like bringing a cup of water to a forest fire, but it was something. It was planting seeds of kindness in return for all the ones Dad had sown. The next visitor was Tom Chen, who ran the hardware store in town. He brought a check for $300. He pressed the crumpled check into Dad's hand, his own hand smelling faintly of wood stain and hardware store dust. And a story. Remember that winter when the pipes froze? You came out at midnight, wouldn't take a dime, said helping was just what people do. Well, now it's my turn to help. By evening, we'd had 12 visitors, each with a casserole or cookies or pie, each with an envelope or a check, each with a story about how Dad had helped them over the years, fixed a fence, plowed a driveway, given away feed when times were tough, years of planting seeds of kindness, and now they were all blooming at once. The kitchen table was covered with food, and next to the foreclosure notice, a small pile of envelopes. We counted it after dinner, $3,200. The kitchen smelled faintly of bacon from breakfast, and the only sound was the creak of Dad's old chair as he leaned back, staring at those bills like they might multiply on their own. It's not enough, Dad said. But for the first time all day, he didn't sound defeated. He sounded amazed. I didn't know. I knew I'd helped folks, but I didn't know they remembered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those envelopes, about neighbors who probably didn't have much giving what they could, about how Dad had spent his whole life planting seeds of kindness, and how they were trying to grow into something that could save him. But $3,000 wasn't $40,000, not even close. I was making coffee at 5 the next morning when Sarah called. I just heard, she said. No hello, no how are you, just straight to the point. That's Sarah. It's bad, I told her. How bad? 40,000 in 90 days bad. Silence. Then, I can get 10, maybe 12 if I cash out some retirement, but I know it's not enough. What about a GoFundMe? People do that now, right? I'd thought about it. But Dad would never agree. Taking money from neighbors who brought casseroles was one thing. Taking money from strangers on the internet was something else entirely. Let me work on him, I said. But I didn't need to. Because that morning, something extraordinary happened. It started with the Methodist church van pulling up, Reverend Johnson and 6 members of the congregation. They brought a check for $5,000. Emergency fund, the Reverend said, for members of our community in crisis. And Frank, you've been part of this community longer than most of us have been alive. Dad wasn't Methodist, wasn't really anything, but he'd plowed their parking lot every winter for free. Just being neighborly, he'd always said. Then came the high school football team, 20 boys in Letterman jackets. Their coach had played for Dad back when Dad volunteered as assistant coach. They'd raised money washing cars, $2,000 in wrinkled bills. The Riverside Garden Club showed up next. Elderly ladies who remembered Mom, who'd bought seeds from her every spring. They'd held a bake sale, $1,500. By lunch, the driveway looked like a parking lot. The kitchen looked like a potluck. And the pile of envelopes had grown into something that required a shoebox. But the most remarkable visitor came that afternoon, a man in a suit, driving a Mercedes that looked out of place among the pickups. The Mercedes door opened, and out stepped a man who looked like he belonged at a boardroom table, not on a gravel driveway. But when he smiled, I saw him, the skinny, sunburned 17-year-old who used to shovel grain in our barn. Mr. Hartley, Frank Hartley? Dad nodded, wary. Men in suits usually meant lawyers or bankers. Neither brought good news. My name is Robert Sinclair. You probably don't remember me. Dad studied him. Then his eyes widened. Bobby? Bobby Sinclair? The kid who used to work summers? The man smiled. It's Robert now, and yes, that was me, 30 years ago. Bobby Sinclair had been a troubled kid from town. Dad had hired him for summer work when no one else would, taught him to drive the tractor, to fix engines, to work hard, more importantly, to believe he was worth something. Dad had been planting seeds of kindness even then, never knowing what might grow. I heard about your situation, Robert said. I own a development company now, based in Cincinnati. I owe everything to you. That summer job. It changed my life, gave me purpose, discipline, hope. He pulled out a check, handed it to Dad with hands that shook slightly. This doesn't begin to repay what you did for me, but I hope it helps. Dad looked at the check. His face went pale. I can't. This is too much. I looked over his shoulder. $20,000. It's not too much, Robert said firmly. It's not enough. You saved my life, Mr. Hartley, not from drowning or a fire, but from becoming nothing, from believing I was nothing. Do you know what that's worth? They talked for an hour. About that summer 30 years ago. About how Robert had gone to college, started his business, built a life, all because someone had believed in him when no one else would. After he left, Dad sat at the kitchen table, staring at that check. I barely remember that summer, he said quietly. Just seemed like a kid who needed work, and I had work that needed doing. That's Dad. Never seeing his kindness as anything special, just doing what needed doing. We counted everything that night. Sarah on speakerphone, Dad finally letting us help with the math, $36,700, plus the 10 Sarah could send, plus the 8 I could manage. We'd done it, more than done it. In 2 days, the community had raised enough to save the farm. But the story doesn't end there. Because farms aren't just about surviving. They're about growing. And what grew from those 2 days was something none of us expected. It started with a meeting at the church. Someone's idea. I never found out whose. But suddenly there was a Save the Hartley Farm Committee, and then a Save All Our Farms Committee. Because Dad wasn't the only one struggling, just the only one facing foreclosure. They organized a harvest festival, not just any harvest festival, the biggest one Riverside had ever seen. Corn maze, pumpkin patch, hay rides, apple cider, all on our farm, all to raise money for local farmers in trouble. I don't know about this, Dad said, watching volunteers set up booths. Seems like a lot of fuss. But when opening day came, cars lined up down the road, families from 3 counties away, city folks wanting a taste of farm life, kids who'd never seen a real tractor climbing all over Dad's old John Deere. The air smelled like kettle corn and apple cider, and you could hear kids squealing with delight from deep inside the corn maze, their voices carrying across the fields like music. Dad ran the hay rides, telling stories about the farm, about his father and grandfather, about the history hidden in every field. I'd never seen him talk so much to strangers, never seen him smile so wide. He was like a different person up there on that wagon, like the weight of the world had lifted, at least for those few hours. The garden club sold pumpkins. The football team ran the corn maze. The church had a bake sale that required 3 tents. And Bobby, Robert, he brought a crew from Cincinnati. Business people who paid $50 for a hayride, who bought pumpkins like they were made of gold. I had to chuckle watching them. These executives in their Italian leather shoes, trying to tiptoe through the mud. One woman in a power suit picked up a pumpkin like it was a newborn baby. Is this one organic? She asked Dad, completely serious. He just smiled and said, Ma'am, everything on this farm is as organic as it gets. They bought 12 pumpkins. 12 for one office. But they were having the time of their lives. The festival ran for 3 weekends. And when we counted the money, it was over $60,000. Enough to help 5 other farms that were struggling. Enough to start an emergency fund for the future. But more important than the money was what happened to the community. Suddenly, everyone was talking. Farming families who'd been too proud to admit they were struggling started asking for help and getting it. Town folks who'd forgotten where their food came from started visiting farms, buying direct, paying fair prices. The hardware store started a seed library. Take what you need, leave what you can. The diner started featuring a different farm every week, buying their produce, telling their story. The school started a program where kids could work on farms for credit, learning what Bobby had learned 30 years ago. And Dad? Dad started something too, coffee meetings, every Tuesday morning at our kitchen table, for farmers who were struggling, not just with money, but with loneliness, with the weight of trying to hold on to something everyone said was dying. "Farming's hard enough," he'd say, pouring coffee for men who'd driven through dawn to be there. No reason to do it alone. They'd talk about prices and weather, about equipment and soil, but they'd also talk about fear, about pride, about the shame of maybe being the generation that lost it all. And somehow, in talking about it, it got lighter, easier to carry. The bank, faced with the full payment plus the story hitting the local news, suddenly found ways to restructure other loans. Funny how flexible they could be when the whole county was watching, when their customers started asking hard questions about supporting local farms. Winter came early that year, but the farm felt warmer than it had in years. The barn hosted square dances. The kitchen was always full of neighbors. The fields, finally harvested, lay under snow like a promise of spring. Dad and I were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the snow pink. He'd been quiet all day, that thoughtful quiet that meant he was working something out. "I've been thinking about your mother," he said finally, about what she'd say about all this. I waited. Dad talked about Mom more now, like the walls he'd built around that grief had finally started to crack. "She always said I was growing more than corn out here, never understood what she meant, thought she was just being poetic. You know how she was." I did know. Mom had seen poetry everywhere, in sunrise, in soil, in the way Dad's hands could coax life from dirt. "But she was right," he continued. "All those years, all those people I helped, I wasn't just farming, I was planting something else. And now," he gestured at the farm, at the lights from town glowing in the distance. "Now it's harvest time for that too." He was right. The farm had been saved. But more than that, something had been born. A community that remembered how to take care of each other. That remembered farming wasn't just a business. It was a way of life worth saving. Spring came with its usual mix of hope and hard work. But now, Dad wasn't doing it alone. The Tuesday coffee group had become a co-op, sharing equipment, sharing labor, sharing the load that had been breaking them one by one. Young people started coming back, kids who'd left for the city, who'd thought farming was a dead end, but who'd seen what happened that October, who'd seen a community refuse to let a farm die, who wanted to be part of something that mattered. Bobby, I still thought of him as Bobby, bought the old Henderson place, not to develop, but to farm. "I've got 30 years of desk work to make up for," he said, learning to drive a tractor again. Sarah moved back that summer, opened a farm-to-table restaurant in town, using produce from the co-op, telling the stories behind every meal. "People don't just want food," she said. "They want connection. They want to know their eating matters." And me? I quit the accounting job. Turns out spreadsheets are just as useful on a farm as in an office, maybe more. I helped the co-op set up their books, taught financial planning at the Tuesday meetings, found ways to make the numbers work as hard as the farmers did. But the biggest change was in Dad. The weight he'd carried for years, the weight of trying to hold it all together alone, was gone. Replaced by something lighter, hope, maybe, or just the simple joy of knowing you're not alone. One morning, about a year after that October, I found Dad in Mom's sunflower field. He'd replanted it that spring. The flowers stood tall now, faces turned toward the rising sun like a congregation in prayer. "She would have loved this," he said when I joined him. All of it, the festival, the co-op, especially the Tuesday meetings. You know what she used to say? "Frank, you feed people's bodies, but you forget to feed their souls." He reached out, touched one of the sunflowers, gentle, like he was touching her face. I get it now, what she meant. All those years I thought farming was about the crops, about the yield, about surviving one more season. But she saw what I couldn't, that it was about more than that. It was about creating something people could belong to. A car pulled up the drive. Another Tuesday regular. Jim Patterson, whose farm sat on the other side of the county. He'd been the quietest one at first, the most broken. His son had died in Afghanistan 2 years back. His wife had left. He'd been farming like a ghost, going through the motions. But the Tuesday group had changed him, slowly, one cup of coffee at a time, one story at a time. Now he brought fresh eggs every week, smiled occasionally, had even started dating the librarian in town. "Morning, Frank." "David," he called out, heading for the house. Then paused. Came back. "Meant to tell you, my nephew's moving down from Detroit, lost his job at the plant. I'm going to teach him farming. Figure it's time to pass something on." That's how it happened. One person at a time, one story at a time. The farm that had almost died became the place where things came to life. We were working in the field one day, planting corn in the same soil that had seen 4 generations of Hartleys, the sun warm on our backs, the earth dark and ready beneath our hands. "You know what I figured out?" Dad said, pausing to wipe his forehead. "What's that?" "The real crop isn't what grows from the ground. It's what grows between people." He let that hang in the air for a moment. Then, connection, community, the knowing that someone's got your back. That's what we're really farming out here. He was quiet for a moment, then smiled, that rare, full smile that made him look 20 years younger. "And you know what else? That's a crop that never fails. Long as you keep tending it, keep planting those seeds of kindness, keep showing up for each other, it just keeps growing." He was right. The farm had been saved by more than money. It had been saved by every act of kindness Dad had sown over the years. Every time he'd helped without being asked, every moment he'd chosen community over profit, every seed of connection he'd planted without expecting a harvest. But he got one anyway. We all did. A harvest of hope in a world that sometimes feels too hard, too disconnected, too focused on the price of things instead of their value. The Hartley farm is still there, still growing corn and soybeans. But it's growing more than that now. It's growing community, growing connections, growing proof that when people come together, when they remember what matters, when they refuse to let each other fail alone. Miracles aren't so miraculous. They're just what happens when you plant kindness and tend it well. Every Tuesday, farmers still gather at our kitchen table. Every fall, the harvest festival gets bigger. Every spring, new seeds go into old ground. And somewhere in Riverside, Ohio, another farmer is helping a neighbor. Another seed of kindness is being planted. Another crop of community is starting to grow. Last month, a documentary crew came through, wanted to film our story. The farm that saved a town, they wanted to call it. But Dad corrected them. The town that saved a farm, he said, and then saved itself. They interviewed him in the cornfield, right where I'd found him crying that morning. But now he stood tall, strong, his words carrying across the rows like seeds on the wind. "People ask me what the secret is," he told the camera, "how we turned it all around. And I tell them it's not a secret. It's just remembering. Remembering that we're all in this together, that your neighbor's struggle is your struggle. Their success is your success. That's not farming wisdom, that's human wisdom. We just happened to figure it out in a cornfield." The documentary aired nationally. Suddenly, we were getting calls from farming communities everywhere. How did you do it? How did you get people to care? How did you save what everyone said was dying? Dad would chuckle at those calls. "We didn't save anything," he'd say. "We just remembered how to be neighbors. The saving took care of itself." But I knew better. I knew it was more than that. It was about a man who'd spent his whole life planting kindness, never expecting a harvest, never keeping track of what he'd sown, just doing what needed doing, helping who needed helping, being the kind of person his father had been, and his father before that. That's the real story. Not the $40,000, not the harvest festival, not even the co-op that now includes 43 farms. The real story is simpler and more powerful. It's that kindness comes back. Maybe not right away, maybe not in the way you expect. But if you spend your life planting good seeds, if you help without keeping score, if you show up for people when they need it, then when your own storm comes, you won't weather it alone. Because that's what Dad taught us, what that October taught us all. You don't farm alone. You can't. The land demands more than any one person can give. But together you can grow more than crops. You can grow hope. You can grow home. You can grow the kind of world where no one loses their farm just because times got hard. And that's a harvest worth working for. One seed, one kindness, one neighbor at a time. Sometimes early in the morning, I still see Dad out there in the cornfield. But now he's not standing alone in the dark. He's waving to a neighbor, his shoulders straight, the sun coming up over a field that's more alive than ever. And somewhere in the distance, a few late sunflowers are still standing, their faces turned toward the morning light, just like hers always were. Another quiet crop of kindness, still growing. And here on this farm, it always will.